Switching the topic from quantitative research that we spent the last 2 weeks on, for the next 2 weeks we will discuss qualitative research design. In this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of qualitative research design. As we previously discussed, research design is essentially the term that describes both the methodology and the procedures that a researcher uses to conduct scientific inquiry. In addition, we know the distinction between quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative research emphasizes quantity amount, intensity, or frequency of certain things and relationships of factors. Also, the research assumes that those things or factors can be experimented or numerically measured. On the other hand, qualitative research emphasizes qualities of particular entities you are interested in and their processes and meanings. Qualitative research focuses on how social experiences are created and given meaning, and tries to understand the processes from the subject's perspectives. From the qualitative approach, reality and meanings are all socially constructed. Therefore, the approach assumes that there is a really close relationship between the researcher and what they are studying, as well as the situational constraints that are shaping their inquiry. So why are the quantitative and qualitative research take different approaches to the phenomenon under study? The Miriam chapter is discussing the philosophical traditions underlying social science research in order to explain the distinction between qualitative and quantitative research. So I'm going to highlight a few dimensions related to the philosophy of knowledge. First of all, what do you see in the picture on the left side of the slide? Do you see a duck or a rabbit? Depending on your perspective, you will see one or the other or both. Thomas Kuhn used this as an example to explain the term paradigm. Basically, paradigm is researchers' or people's underlying assumptions about the nature of reality, kind of worldview. The general perspective of people in understanding the complexity of how the world works. Therefore, paradigm serves as a philosophical orientation that researchers take towards understanding knowledge. So one's paradigm is basically an interpretive framework, and it is guided by a set of beliefs and feelings about the world and how it should be understood and studied. So how is the paradigm related to social science research and how we approach designing studies in the spectrum of qualitative versus quantitative designs? Essentially, there are 4 common worldviews in social science and educational research. They include positivism, constructivism, advocacy and participatory, and pragmatism. First, positivists view that research or knowledge can somewhat capture the patterns of the real world and assume that there's some kind of objective and measurable reality out there that we can study. Does it sound like a familiar approach to research to you? Yes, most quantitative researchers are fit within the positivist worldview, as they summarize the reality using a numerical data or try to understand the relationship between things using data and measurements while they are testing theories about the phenomenon of interest. On the other hand, constructivists are people who really believe that they are conducting research as they are trying to construct their own meanings and engaging with the world. Basically, they believe that there are multiple subjects, realities across different people rather than one big truth, which is more what the positivists think. As constructivists really emphasize the social world and understanding interactions of individuals with one another and with their surroundings, oftentimes qualitative researchers adhere to the constructivist paradigm. However, constructivist paradigm is not the only lens that tries to understand how each individual person constructs meaning about their place in the world. There are 2 other paradigms that people use to construct educational research. One is referred to often as either advocacy or participatory research, and then the other is pragmatism. The researchers in the 1980s who didn't think that there has been enough attention given to social justice came to a view that knowledge should be with politics or political agenda. The advocacy and participatory paradigm of research really sees the world being unfair, aims to bring about change to move the world in a better direction. So the research is a mechanism to advocate for that kind of change. Finally, pragmatism is a paradigm that really focuses on what works and solutions to problems rather than pure interest in understanding the nature of reality or the laws of the nature. The researchers focus on real-world practice, and research methodology is used to fix the problem at hand. Over time, paradigm was shifted from a philosophical view of world that considered world as more of a static, unchanging machine. This modernism paradigm, which related to positivism, then grew to postmodernism that rejects the idea that we can ever come to conclusions about the nature of social reality. Postmodernism emphasizes the idea that the world is always changing and fragmented, and it's difficult to ever come to generalizable conclusions. Another philosophical debate that I think is important to discuss in the context of education research is the question of the degree to which social structures influence on individuals' behavior and whether or not individuals have agency over their thinking and behavior. Structuralism versus post-structuralism take different approaches about individuals' capacity to act independently. Basically, structuralists believe that a structure such as social class, religion, gender, and ethnicity exerts an important influence on human thinking and behavior, and it's important to study and understand how institutions and cultures are reflected in people's behaviors and in society. Meanwhile, post-structuralists reject the idea of structuralism, and they're interested in deconstructing things and focusing on individuals' differences and knowledge. In this debate, education is a really important social structure, and what philosophical approach we take about structure and individuals can determine our approach to conduct and discuss any educational issues. So why do we have to care about the philosophy of knowledge? As we saw, different paradigms have different assumptions about the world and research. Depending on what worldview we take, our approach to conducting research, as well as our approach to understanding and interpreting research and constructing reforms or policies or practices would be different. Oftentimes, when we have disagreement in what education should be about, how to understand what we know about education, and how to best construct policy or practice around education. Now, it could be the paradigm or philosophical traditions that people stand on can be the reason of why people take different opinions about education and educational research. On the one hand, some people might approach educational research from a positive perspective and think that we can make reasonable prediction and plan the education accordingly. On the other hand, from a constructivism perspective, some people think the world is very chaotic and random, and therefore we cannot necessarily understand it fully. So as educators, it's important to think about if we need to prepare our students for an orderly world that's very predictable or a chaotic world that's not very predictable. The conclusion is that understanding how we are approaching educational issues and research issues would help us all to make more informed opinions and understanding how we are approaching educational issues and research issues. Now, let's move on to qualitative research designs, and now more specifically, I just want to highlight several characteristics of all qualitative research designs, and then I'm going to get into some specific types of qualitative research design. First, qualitative researchers typically take what's called an emic lens on their phenomenon. This means that qualitative researchers are taking an insider's perspective and are attempting to understand the phenomena from a part of their participants' perspective, not from their own perspective as a researcher. So really trying to put yourself in the place of the people who are the focus of your study. The other thing that's important to remember is that you as a researcher are the data collection instrument. So you are an integral part of the design of your study. You are out there doing interviews, facilitating focus groups, observing behaviors, reading documents. So your lens on the world is affecting how you are interpreting data. Therefore, it's really important as a qualitative researcher to be aware of your worldview, your philosophy of knowledge, as well as your pre-existing approach to the topic. You must acknowledge potential biases or ideas you might have coming into the study and acknowledge that in your research report. Also, in relation to this point, researchers also need to provide detailed information about the people who are participating as participants of the study and about your position with that research. Another characteristic of qualitative research is that it's focused on setting real-world situations as they evolve or unfold naturally. So it's not manipulative and it's not controllable. So qualitative researchers are definitely not employing or attempting to employ an experimental design and need to be open to whatever emerges from their study. Maybe what you hear from your participants is going to be what you expect, but in qualitative research, a lack of previous turn and constraints on your findings, so you really need to be in natural setting and allow your findings to emerge. Related to that is you take more inductive approach to your topic when you are conducting a qualitative research. It's really about building theories about a phenomenon. And also, qualitative research really focuses on rich description. What you offer should be very detailed and focused, so the people who are reading about your study really feels that they are part of the setting and they're getting a great understanding of what's going on. Okay, so now getting into some specific types of qualitative research design. We will discuss 6 types of research design here. I will introduce some examples for each design and you will be able to find them on the supplemental section in Blackboard. So first one I'm going to talk about is ethnography. If you are maybe majored in undergraduate on anthropology, you recognize the term ethnography because that's where the main approach to research that anthropologists use to describe culture of indigenous people such as Kuna. Anyway, essentially what ethnographers try to do is understand the cultural characteristics of any given group of people defined as a shared beliefs, values, practicing languages, norms, rituals, and material things that the group members use to understand their world. So when can you use that ethnography in higher education? Let's say you want to study a university, department, or program in depth that you really want to understand what people do, how things work, or how things are run, and different aspects of culture. Then you will need to try to capture practices and rituals, people's lives, their customs, values, and beliefs. Those kind of things really lend themselves nicely to ethnography. On the next slide, I will give you an example of a study that was done in higher education using ethnography. Again, the full article is up on Blackboard. Rose 1995 provides a study of fraternity culture. The purpose of this study was to explore and better understand the culture of fraternities on college campuses. So, thinking back about the philosophy of knowledge, the author took advocacy or participatory paradigm to approach and study this fraternity culture because specifically he was interested in how the culture of the fraternity contributed to the marginalization and victimization of women on campus. This is the purpose of the study directly found from his text, and you can see right here that he was very clear about his position that he was going to use a critical lens to understand the culture of power in the fraternity. So several distinguishing features of ethnography are that it involves intensive or extensive contact in the field, observing and interviewing participants. And it really relies on thicker descriptions. So if you read the whole study that is up on Blackboard, you will see what I mean by thicker and vivid descriptions as he explains very specifically about events that are occurred and what he saw in the fraternity. One of the things that I really wanted to highlight that's important in all qualitative research, and he did a really nice job with this, is that you need to explain your own position related to the study. So in this paragraph, where Rose explained to readers that conducting ethnography research usually requires the ethnographers to work in the community that they're studying for 6 months to a year. more to really embed themselves in the field where the phenomena they're interested in studying is happening or their participations are living. So the researcher is claiming that his background and experiences, including working in student affairs at that university, working with Greek life and Greek organizations, allowed him an entry into that fraternity culture and really embedded himself with the fraternity. So that's important when you are doing an ethnography and also doing any kind of qualitative research to explain how you, as a researcher, and put yourself and position yourself in the study and how you are related with participants that you are studying. Okay, so another type of qualitative research design is called phenomenology, and phenomenology has philosophical origin. The foundational question that phenomenologists try to understand is what is the meaning, structure, and essence of the lived experience of any of the phenomenon by individuals or groups. So essentially what researchers are trying to do is understanding what it's like to be this person or be part of this specific group. If we apply this approach to our higher education research, it could be a study of understanding what is the essence of being perhaps a college student, or what is the essence of being a first generation college student. Or it could be a study of what students' lived experience of being part of the student activism or activism group. Because phenomenology based on a question of what is the core of that group of people. So really what you want to try to do is provide rich description of those people. Also, an important aspect of phenomenology is this idea of bracketing. That is, when the researcher tries to set aside his or her preconceived notions, assumptions, or knowledge about the experience and try to really understand things from the participant's perspective. So as a researcher who studies the experience of first-generation college student, even if, let's say, you were a first-generation college student yourself, what you try to do as you try to bracket or suspend your preconceptions about what it means to be first-generation college student and try to understand the essence of it from the experience of your participants is really trying to understand how people make meaning in their life. So the basic idea of phenomenology, using an example I will give from the next slide, is about the experience of community college students enrolled in online courses that target students at risk. The purpose statement first explains why the researchers conducted a phenomenological research. Their goal was to understand what the challenging experiences were for the community college students enrolled in high-risk online courses. Then in their method section, the researchers explain why phenomenology best serves their research purpose. Again, I would highlight that the researchers emphasize that what they want to understand is the lived experience of students from the participants' perspective. Next is the grounded theory. So grounded theory is the idea of actually constructing or discovering theory from data. Grounded theory has sociological origin, and a lot of sociologists use grounded theory approach to examine the question at hand and see what explanation emerges from analyzing the data that we collected about the particular phenomenon. So really, it's used obviously to generate theory, and as hopefully you remember, theories explain how and why things are happening. Grounded theories can also be used to test previously established grounded theory. The idea behind is that you are continuing to modify and build the theory, so you are not necessarily satisfied with a theory that was built at first, and you conduct further grounded theory study to modify that theory. An important concept in grounded theory is saturation. So from a grounded theory perspective, you are done building your theory when you are not finding any more concepts and you are just keep running into the same concepts emerged from your data. Now then, your theory has been validated. Essentially, grounded theory is really helpful when there is no prior information on an area or phenomena, or sometimes when you want to study how people interact and engage with one another. So I'll give an example of grounded theory using the study of Rand and Jessup Anger. Their research question was, how do first-time, full-time student affairs professionals experience their first year on the job? The theory tells us, as I said in the last slide, how and why something happens and provides explanation. The researchers here are explaining how they conducted the study from a grounded theory perspective to explain how student affairs professionals experience their first year on the job. Basically, when you are building a grounded theory, you will do what's called coding. So you will go through the data collected and start identifying themes that are developed from your data. You will repeat the process until you keep singing the same themes and do not see any new themes emerge from your qualitative data, which is, the saturation point. We will come back to this concept of coding and learn in detail how to code your qualitative data in the class, so don't worry about it at the moment. But it's important to know that that's a key part of grounded theory, which is coding your data to develop theory. Case study is another qualitative method that researchers used to understand the topic. So essentially, the study would address the question of what are the characteristics of this single case, or what are the characteristics of these cases compared to one another. As an example, we can take this approach to understand the decision that was made or set of decisions made at a particular university. So the university becomes the case, as well as that particular decision or sets of decisions becomes the case or cases. And we can also look at why decisions makers at that university did make that particular decision, how they implemented policies and practice, or what the results were. It can be very eclectic in terms of the kinds of data that you collect or the concepts and theories that you might use or the methodology that you are using to collect your data. So the important thing to know, though, is again, in your final report, you have to give a very, very rich description of what the case was, where the cases were, as well as the context surrounding the cases. All right, so I'm going to give you an example of a case study, and maybe some of you already heard about this book called Paying for the Party. Armstrong and Hamilton wanted to know the experiences and class trajectories out of college and actually relate these to individual students' socioeconomic backgrounds, and particularly focusing on female students. So their approach to study this topic was to conduct a case study at a Midwest university and a party dome of that university. So basically, they collected data by using multiple methods, such as interviews and observations, longitudinally over 5 years. So what I would point out here is that the authors allocated one chapter providing a thick description of the case. So again, in any case study or qualitative study in general, you have to provide detailed information about the study setting. For a case study, you will need to provide why that particular case you are studying is really beneficial for understanding the phenomena of interest, as the authors tried to do here. Another kind of qualitative research design is called discourse analysis. Essentially, discourse analysis is based in linguistics and communication, and basically it's studying the micro features of communication. So what the studies are focusing on is sort of semantics, how people do things with words and how people talk and respond to one another. I'll give you an example of a research study that did discourse analysis in the context of higher education. So Taylor and Murphy 2010 wanted to understand how universities and colleges represent themselves to their stakeholders, including potential students. What these researchers did then was they collected college mission statements from bachelor's degree schools and analyzed the languages used in the statements. What's referred to up here in the research question is these two different definitions. So Brennan definition of a liberal arts college, they analyzed the mission statements using that definition. And the authors use this linguistic framework adapted from this linguistic person, Ursula, to understand the mission statement and examine the rhetorical strategy that are used in each of the document. Finally, it's important to know that actually some studies that used qualitative research methodology doesn't fall within any of those design with specific design types. Basically, you can do just a generic qualitative research study if you're interested in simply describing phenomena of interest and not really know using grounded theory or phenomenology approach will help you transforming and interpreting your data. However, you still use coding like grounded theories too, but you are not really into building some sort of large-scale theory or interpreting the sense of people's experience like phenomenology. So essentially, you can use a generic qualitative study design to understand phenomena by describing what's going on other people's experiences, focusing on who, what, where, how, and etc. It is also important to know that a lot of times we read about all these different types of qualitative designs that are very specific and very sort of niche. They all came out of the different disciplines, as nice as I noted, but it's also important to know that you can just do a generic or descriptive qualitative study, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically any one of those given categories. You can draw from 3 different aspects of each of those different designs or each of those different sort of techniques within the different designs of qualitative research if that lends itself to your study. So here's an example that employed a generic qualitative study approach. In this study, the authors stated that they were really interested in understanding the concepts in higher education of student involvement, student engagement, and student integration, and they wanted to understand the degree to which those concepts are similar or different. So they interviewed higher education professionals about their understanding of those different terms and how they discern the differences between involvement, engagement, and integration in their practice. In their description of the method, the authors were clear that they totally didn't want to develop the theory of involvement, engagement, or integration. They just wanted to understand how people are using those concepts and how people interact with those concepts and practice. So again, they didn't fit themselves into any one of those designs that I talked about in the previous slides. So they just used a qualitative research design in terms of doing interviews of people. In this presentation, I described different types of qualitative research designs. Yet again, know that you can choose from particular type of research design, but you don't necessarily have to fit yourself into one of those designs unless your topic really does lend itself to a particular type or approach of research design. Alright, so we are at the end of this lecture and I have given you an overview of qualitative design. There's one more lecture to watch for this week that focuses on how to collect data in qualitative research and also how to sample for qualitative research. In class, we will do some activities related to qualitative design as well as workshop through the project for those of you who are thinking of designing a qualitative research study for your applied project.